Alright folks, today I'm here to discuss with you the rather confusing origins of the Wildfire Virus in the Walking Dead universe. Now, as most of you probably already know, wildfire itself is one of the most mysterious aspects of this world, as it seemingly appeared from nowhere before ravaging society. But over the last 15 years, we've gotten various tidbits of information that have offered clues on where it could have came from. The post-credit scene at the end of World Beyond implies wildfire originated from a lab in France, but in my opinion, the language used is a little too vague to say for certain, so I'll address both sides of the argument as we go along. But with that, if you end up enjoying this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you hit that like button and drop a sub to see more content like this. Now, what exactly is wildfire? Well, according to Dr. Jenner of the Atlanta CDC, they had no idea. Even by the time our survivors meet him around 2 months in, no further progress on his end had been made. Before the other scientists bolted out the door or opted out on outbreak day, they were trying to determine if it was microbial, viral, parasitic, fungal, or maybe even the wrath of God. But as Jenner explains, they weren't able to definitively label its origins before things went sideways. However, they were able to log what happened to someone who was infected. You see, although still unconfirmed, the virus is speculated to be transmitted through air as its cells appeared in the blood of every human on Earth by Monument Day. We learn from Tobias and Fear there were already reported cases in 5 states of a strange flu going around by the morning of August 25th. 2 entire days before the collapse of society, which is unclear if it's meant to infer the symptoms of wildfire itself had been making people sick and eventually killing them, unlike what we see with your typical carrier, or if they simply died right when infection coincidentally occurred. The Clark's neighbor appeared to be coughing without any clear bite marks or indication they were previously sick. So it's possible those who carried wildfire but survived into the outbreak were immune to its initial fatal symptoms, but would still succumb to the infection if bit. But given how fast everything fell apart, I'm led to believe wildfire had some sort of incubation period within its host for weeks or maybe even months before it became active, as it doesn't really make sense for everyone to catch it worldwide within a couple days in my mind, even more so if we consider those aboard the USS Pennsylvania had been infected during this time when they were nowhere near the public. It's unknown who the first person to turn was, but from what I can piece together, when the saliva or fluids of an already turned individual enters the bloodstream, the already present wildfire cells within flare up and spread throughout the body before killing the carrier as it reaches the brain. Another theory is that the sheer amount of bacteria in the walkers' mouths is what kills the infected through the symptoms they bring, but I don't really see how that would apply to freshly turned walkers. And if that were the case, you'd think some variation of medication would be able to fight it off. But of course, what sets this disease apart from any other is its ability to reanimate the brainstem, causing the host to return as a soulless husk hell-bent on consuming the living. There is no cure, and no way to permanently prevent the infection from spreading aside from amputation when possible from what we've learned so far. The only way to definitively put down the turned is to inflict trauma to the brain. Now, we've been able to pinpoint wildfire's discovery to April 2010. As Dr. Jenner in The Walking Dead Season 1 mentions, it's been 194 days since wildfire was declared and 63 days since it went global. AMC themselves have confirmed Outbreak Day or Monument Day took place on August 27, 2010, which we know happened simultaneously across the planet, evident from flashbacks in Daryl Dixon's Season 1, and the cosmonaut who mentions watching the lights go out around the world all on the same night in Fear Season 3. So if we subtract 63 from 194, we are left with 131 days before August 27th. Putting us at April 18th, 2010 for its discovery, or at least for when it was identified. Although, I guess it depends on Dr. Jenner's definition of abruptly going global. Again, if you consider August 25th to be the true day the dead began to walk, or at least when the medical professionals acknowledged it to be, then wildfire could have been discovered as early as April 16th. Regardless, this means for over 3 months, government officials and scientists around the world had to have been aware of wildfire and were presumably working together to find a solution. Which we see to be the case, as Dr. Jenner mentions the French were the last to hold out before communications fully went down, implying other countries were also in contact with the US CDCs attempting to figure this thing out for months, all while wildfire was assumed to unknowingly be spreading and incubating throughout the world before awakening over the course of a week. Why didn't anyone warn the public? Well, if you're taking the authorities' word on it, they simply didn't know the true nature of wildfire until it was too late to prevent its spread. Now, for the longest time, our survivors' visit to the CDC and brief moments in Fear Season 1 were all we had to determine where this thing came from. At this point, the wrath of God or some supernatural origin was starting to sound like a pretty plausible theory. That is, until the series finale of World Beyond, where we are given a post-credit scene that kind of threw everything up in the air. I've covered this scene to death, so if you're a longtime viewer, bear with me here. But what a lot of people took away from this was wildfire itself had been created by scientists in the La Biomedicine lab within France. What is the evidence for this? Well, we see recordings of Dr. Jenner from the early days discussing the French's experiments on wildfire through the use of cardiac plaques, and the man we see shoot the woman said to be a part of some mysterious Violet team straight up says, "You started this, and then you made it worse." We also see graffiti on the wall translating to "The dead are born here." So you would think that would be an open and shut case, right? Well, how exactly does that make sense? Dr. Jenner, months after radio silence, was adamant he had no idea what this was or where it came from all the way until his death, even entertaining the idea of it being the wrath of God. We're directly shown he was actively talking to members of these teams and sharing data of what they've found. So why wouldn't the Violet team mention they were the ones who accidentally started this if they were collaborating with others to find a solution? They, of all people, would know best the severity of what they created, so you would think they would understand legal consequences for their actions would be much better than a complete apocalyptic scenario. So why would they lie? We even hear the team closest to finding a solution, referred to as Primrose, was in Toledo, Ohio when the lab was raided by whatever organization this man is with, which tells me they were working closer with the American government than initially believed. So what would be their motivation for causing something like this and then keeping it a secret from those who could help prevent its spread? The graffiti on the wall is questionable, but to be fair, it's kind of vague and we don't even know who wrote it in the first place. Who's to say it wasn't some angry raider who wandered in to make a statement based off rumors? So let's say the teams didn't create wildfire and simply experimented on it. What does the line, "You started this and then you made it worse," mean in this context? Well, it could be as simple as they either discovered wildfire first, or they were the ones who accidentally let it leak into the public, possibly after testing its effects on the human body. And the "made it worse" part would apply to the birth of the variants, as it seems from what we see in the modern day, they had regret for their actions and tried to make it right through further experiments with cardiac plaques that went wrong. In this scenario, it was technically their fault, but would absolve the writers of having to make a motivation for its creation and a reason to keep it a secret from Jenner. This way, they didn't make it, and still didn't fully understand what it was by the time of the outbreak. They just accidentally kickstarted it before dooming France even further while trying to fix it. Now, that would still leave the question of where it came from a mystery. Perhaps it really just sprung up one day as a result of nature fighting back against man. But let's say the French did create it within that lab. Why and how? Well, I'm not smart enough to figure out the how, to be honest, but I could have an explanation for the why. If this were to be the case, the teams definitively lied to Jenner and by extension the rest of the scientists across the world about their full extent of knowledge on wildfire. You know, the people who could stop this from spreading best. In this scenario, the "you started it" part of the quote does directly mean they created it and caused its spread. And again, the "made it worse" part could still apply to the variants, as they more than likely regretted their actions in ending the world. Primrose's team was at a conference in Ohio when things went south at the lab and haven't returned since, meaning the French scientists were indeed working independently with the US government directly in some form which wasn't public knowledge, even to someone such as Dr. Jenner at the CDC, as far as we know. So could this have been a collaborative effort between the two countries that became unmanageable? Well, if you've seen my Missing President video, you may remember the end section where I discussed the Fear the Walking Dead webisode's radio waves. In particular, the segment titled Conspiracy Theory that features a man claiming to have found evidence the US government was responsible for wildfire's creation in an attempt at population control. But as things got out of hand, what was left of the government fled in secrecy, leaving society behind to die. However, the man provides no evidence for these claims and kind of conveys them like a crazy person, so there's no way of telling if this is actually true. But if this were the case, Le Biomedicine Lab in France was commissioned to create something to achieve this goal by the US government. But as it began to unexpectedly spread rapidly across the globe, teams such as Primrose were sent to a conference in Ohio to discuss how to combat their mistake. But by this time, it was already too late. The French scientists, a part of the Violet team left behind, had lied to Jenner as they were sworn to secrecy by the US and possibly French governments, but still valued his input on trying to stop it as they regretted their actions in letting it get out of control. But when word got out of the scientists who did this experimenting further, the people came together to arrest and, in some cases, killed those responsible. It's pretty funny to think a 1-minute webisode without any footage could be the missing link to putting all of this together. But the biggest issue with this post-credit scene is the fact that it's never been followed up on. It was created as a teaser for what to expect in France come the Daryl Dixon spin-off. But now that Daryl and Carol are moving on to other countries, we're still left with the same questions we had when World Beyond concluded all those years ago. Will this scene ever be followed up on? I really hope so, but at this point I've gotta assume it was an early plan for Daryl Dixon that changed during development and the writers are just hoping we forget about it. But I'm not gonna let them. Lastly, I wanted to discuss the alien theory. Many years ago, when asked on Twitter what created the virus in the comic universe, Kirkman simply tweeted out "space spores" and hasn't really followed up on it since. In my mind, this was a joke referencing the series' origins, as Kirkman was forced to lie about the zombies preceding an alien invasion in order to get it published by Image. And to be honest, I don't think Gimple would allow a simple tweet to define the show's entire canon. But you have to admit, Wildfire does have otherworldly properties that aren't possible in our reality. So who knows, maybe it was aliens all along. I guess only Gimple will tell. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think about everything we've discussed today. Is Wildfire simply a product of nature? The wrath of God? An alien bioweapon? Or an intentional creation through collaboration by the US government and French scientists? If you're asking my opinion, for the longest time I was of the belief Wildfire was a product of nature, like some sort of allegory for man's effect on the planet, similar to Godzilla in a way. But I have to admit, with the evidence from everything we've discussed, I'm starting to lean more towards the side of it being man-made after all. Everything kinda just falls into place perfectly if we consider the government to have been the culprits, given how secretive they were to the public when it was discovered and how quickly they left everything behind to die. Could population control be the reasoning? I guess it could be, but honestly, I hope the writers come up with something more creative if they ever choose to explore this further. Either way, let me know what you believe in the comments down below. I think this is a topic that'll definitely spark conversation. But that's gonna do it for me today, folks. As always, thank you so much for watching. And AMC, do not leave that post-credit scene hanging.